All right, this is Greg Boughton. I'm Ashley Powell, and this is our second coaching session. I observed Mr. Boughton during a open-ended percents lesson. The students were working on solving percent problems, and they were doing percents of a whole using tape diagrams to model the problems. So, Mr. Boughton, how do you feel the lesson went?
Well, I think overall there was some learning done. There was a lot of good communication in the groups that they were working in. There were probably some hiccups. I mean, in hindsight, that maybe some changes I would think about, but there was a lot of good communication. I guess there were some positives about it, and overall, I think it was a good lesson that may need some changes or some tweaks to it.
I remember walking around and seeing different groups of students who were communicating about how to structure their tape diagrams, and they were very, very well versed in how to set the percent over 100 and the shortcut to dividing by 10. So they were very well versed in that and learning how to set up the tape diagram. So they were communicating about that very openly. So kudos about that.
Good.
As far as the structure of the lesson, how would you change it in the future?
Well, they did struggle through some of the problems, and I think maybe what I should do with those problems were to time them, maybe just give them 5 minutes, and then stop the lesson as a group, and then have just kind of a whole class discussion about their strategies about number one, and have the kids share what strategies they used, so that any of the groups that were kind of stuck on number one were allowed to catch up and to see what the mistakes they were making and what maybe some confusion that they had, and then they can move on to number two. So maybe include some stopping points along the way where we stop and then discuss as a whole class. And I think maybe there was too much time just given for the groups to work together, that I needed to break it up a little more.
Okay.
I think I would have done that.
I think that sounds like a good idea. I think one suggestion I would recommend was maybe a formative assessment in the beginning. I saw that you had a question on the board, but maybe doing a formative assessment maybe beforehand.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good idea to kind of gauge their understanding, maybe. I could probably do some, even on the previous lesson or before we started this activity, give them some type of formative questioning so that I can see if there's any gaps, I guess, in their understanding, so that they would work a little more fluidly during the lesson. So I think that's pretty good advice. I think I could do that.
Okay. What would a follow-up lesson look like?
So like a lesson after this activity then?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they would be expected to work independently. I'm hoping that they go from a point where they've discussed these problems, and maybe some kids who had some misunderstandings here and there maybe had some clarity from other kids teaching them. So I think from that point, I would expect them to work independently on problems like this. So we would probably have a little bit of time where just on their own they would work on problems like this. But I mean, judging from this activity, I really would want to see where they are now. Probably I'd give some type of formative assessment and then move into independent work. But that would be the general plan.
Okay. I think going back to ratios, like you mentioned before, going back to a previous unit, I really think having the students understand a comparison of part to part, part to whole, which I think you did a great job with that in the planning stages. I think by having the students solve problems where they understand they're giving a whole and they need to divide it into the entire tape diagram, or given a part, then they would divide it into a part of the tape diagram, would also give them a sense of understanding, would be a suggestion I would make if you were going to go back to ensure that they were reaching mastery towards the percent problems.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay. Okay. And to revisit your original goal, which we were saying that our students would be able to reason and problem solve. How does what we're doing help them to reach that goal?
Well, what I like about using a tape diagram and doing these type of problems is that they really do have to understand what the math is. They really have to understand that what division is, that you're taking a whole thing and you're splitting it amongst certain parts. So, and I think a lot of kids struggle with that, just understanding the concept of division and being able to apply it. So in these type of problems, they're applying that math to the model. So I think anytime they're working with a model, they're learning how to problem solve. And maybe a step after this would maybe be writing about it, like doing a constructed response where they are explaining why they are cutting something up into 10 parts or where they got that from, and they're explaining why the certain number is the whole or it's the part, or how they're going about solving this problem. So maybe writing about it in a constructed response format would kind of clarify their thought process, which is like their reasoning through a problem solving process. So I think that would be valuable for them to do.
Okay. That sounds like a great plan. It also sounds like it could relate to where we're going in the future with the method in which we want to teach solving a division equation, when we were talking about taking a whole and dividing it and showing how they're splitting something.
Yeah.
So I think this would lay a great foundation for where we're going in the future as well. So it sounds like we have our plan of action of what we're going to do next to help our students continue to reason and solve through problems. And we're just going to work on making sure that we check for understanding during lessons. You're going to stop and give smaller increments of time to check for understanding as well. I think that those are all great suggestions to get to where we want to be in the future. I think you're doing a great job.
You're a wonderful coach, too.
Don't butter me up.